The dashcam kept rolling, long after Constable Travis Kellerman told it to stop mattering. He didn't know that yet. He didn't know that in 11 minutes, the badge on his chest would mean less than the paper it was pinned to, or that the man who'd end his career was already 40 kilometers out, doing 110 on the QEII with his jaw set like poured concrete. All Kellerman knew, standing on the shoulder of Highway 2 outside Larkspur Hollow, with the July sun frying the asphalt, was that he'd found himself a payday. He just hadn't checked whose family he was cashing in on. The Lexus LX 600 rode like a hotel room. Emmanuel Danladi still wasn't fully used to it. 3 weeks now, and he still gripped the wheel, the way a man grips a ladder he doesn't trust. "You're strangling that steering wheel again," Beatrice said, not looking up from the church bulletin she was folding into her purse. "It's not going to buck you off, Emmanuel. Feels like driving a spaceship, Bea. All these screens. I just want to keep both hands where they belong." She smiled, the kind of smile that had survived 46 years of marriage, 3 kids, and 1 very long winter in Fort McMurray. "Julian wanted us safe. That's all it is. He worries." "He worries like his mother," Emmanuel said, and she swatted his arm. They were an hour out from the Larkspur Hollow Legion Hall, where the community was throwing a homecoming barbecue that afternoon. Half for the new Veterans Memorial Garden being dedicated, half because their son was finally back on Canadian soil after 8 months in Latvia with the NATO battle group. Emmanuel had a folding table and 2 coolers of potato salad in the back. Beatrice had baked 7 dozen butter tarts, because in her mind a homecoming without butter tarts wasn't a homecoming at all. Julian had arranged the Lexus through a dealership contact while he was still overseas, a surprise, paid outright, delivered to their driveway with a bow the size of a hula hoop. The Buick's had its last winter, Dad. Humour me. Emmanuel had grumbled about it for a week and secretly loved every kilometre of it since. It was unfortunately exactly the kind of vehicle that made Constable Travis Kellerman sit up straighter in his cruiser, tucked behind a billboard for a personal injury lawyer 2 kilometres outside town. "Quiet one today," said his partner, Constable Aidan Foss, 24 years old, and still new enough to think every shift needed a story to tell afterward. "Give it a minute," Kellerman said. "Long weekend, traffic. People get careless when they're relaxed." Then the Lexus slid past, gunmetal grey, tint dark enough to swallow light. Kellerman's eyes tracked it like a hawk clocking a field mouse. "Well now, would you look at that? Nice ride," Foss said. "That's, what, 90 grand? Easy." Kellerman pulled out, closing the gap without lights, without sirens, just patient predatory drift. When he got close enough to see through the tint, his mouth curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Huh, 2 seniors up front. Doesn't exactly track with the vehicle, does it? You think it's stolen? I think a $100,000 SUV in a town like Larkspur Hollow, driven by 2 people who look like that, is worth a closer look." He flipped the lights on before Foss could finish, nodding. Emmanuel's heart gave its familiar, aging stutter in his chest. "Oh Lord, you weren't speeding," Beatrice said quietly, her hand finding his forearm. "Just pull over. It'll sort itself out." He eased the Lexus onto the gravel shoulder with hands that had laid pipeline in worse weather than this, and still, somehow, could not stop trembling now. He'd grown up in Regina in the 70s. He knew what a police stop could turn into if you let your face say the wrong thing, and he'd taught all 3 of his kids the same lesson before they were 10 years old. Hands where they can see them, voice steady. Don't give them a reason. "Keep calm, Emmanuel," Beatrice whispered. "Don't give him anything." Kellerman took his time approaching, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky, thumbs hooked in his belt. He rapped on the glass with his knuckle, hard, twice. "Morning, officer," Emmanuel said, rolling the window down. "Was I speeding?" Kellerman didn't answer right away. He leaned in, looked past Emmanuel at Beatrice in her good church cardigan, then back. "License and registration." "Lice is in my breast pocket, registration's in the glove box. I'll reach for them now, if that's all right." "Don't reach for anything." Kellerman's voice had dropped an octave, the tone men like him, reserved for moments they wanted witnesses to remember as tense. "Whose vehicle is this?" "My son's. He leased it for us. He's a captain in the Canadian Armed Forces, just back from." Kellerman actually laughed. A short, ugly bark. "Sure he is. Step out of the vehicle." "Officer, I've got 2 knee replacements, if I could just..." "Out now." He yanked the door open himself. "You too, ma'am. What have we done?" Beatrice's voice cracked on the last word. "Failure to comply is what you're doing right now." Foss chimed in from the passenger side, opening Beatrice's door with more force than necessary, emboldened by his training officer's aggression, the way rookies always are, desperate to prove they belonged. Emmanuel climbed out slowly, leaning on the door frame, a 71-year-old man in a pressed grey suit who looked, to anyone with eyes, like a deacon on his way to a church function. To Kellerman, he looked like a suspect who hadn't been caught yet. "Face the vehicle. Hands on the hood." "Officer, this is unnecessary. My son. I don't want to hear about your imaginary son." Kellerman kicked Emmanuel's ankle to widen his stance, and Emmanuel gasped, his bad knee buckling for half a second before he caught himself on the hood. Beatrice clutched her purse to her chest on the far side of the vehicle, tears already starting. "Emmanuel, are you all right, please? Just tell them. Bag on the hood, ma'am." Foss barked. "Search position." "This is humiliating," Emmanuel said, his voice rising despite himself. "We are not criminals. Check the registration." "The name is Dan Laddie." "We'll get to that." Kellerman pulled his wallet from his back pocket, flipped it open, studied the ID like it was written in a language he didn't trust. "Tell me, Mr. Dan Laddie, how does a man on a pension afford a vehicle like this?" "I told you, my son bought it. He's a captain." "Right, and I'm the Governor General." Kellerman tossed the wallet onto the hood, close enough to the edge that it nearly slid off. "Or maybe captain is code for something else." Beatrice gasped audibly. "How dare you? We raised our children in the church. We have never..." "Quiet." Kellerman circled the vehicle slowly, peering through the windows, running a hand along the trim like he was appraising it for auction. "Foss, run the VIN. Take your time. I want to see what else is in there." Traffic slowed on Highway 2 to Gork. A minivan full of kids crept past at a walking pace, one small face pressed to the window, pointing. Emmanuel felt the shame climb up his neck like a fever. "Officer," he tried one more time. "My son is meeting us at the Legion Hall in an hour, if you'd just call him." "You mentioned this, son. One more time. I'm cuffing you for obstruction." Kellerman got in close enough that Emmanuel could smell the burnt coffee on his breath. "You fit a profile, old man. Expensive car, wrong part of town, story that doesn't add up." "What profile is that?" Emmanuel said quietly, though he already knew the answer sitting in the air between them. Kellerman's jaw tightened. "Watch your tone. You're resisting." "I am standing perfectly still." "You're being combative." He unclipped his handcuffs. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." "No," Beatrice cried, stepping around the front of the vehicle. "He has arthritis. You'll hurt him." "Back, ma'am," Foss shouted, hand drifting toward his taser. "You put those on me and you are making a very serious mistake," Emmanuel warned, his dignity fighting a losing battle with the animal part of his brain screaming, "Survive this." "I make the rules out here," Kellerman said, and spun him, wrenching his arms back. The cuffs clicked shut, biting into wrists that had spent 4 decades on scaffolding, without ever once flinching. Emmanuel groaned and lowered his forehead to the hot metal roof, praying the way his mother had taught him. Not for rescue, just for the strength to survive the next 5 minutes with his soul intact. That was when the highway filled with a different sound, not a sedan's hum, the low diesel growl of something enormous, coming up fast in the breakdown lane, throwing gravel. A charcoal grey Ford F-350 with a lift kit and Alberta plates screeched to a stop 10 meters back. "Great," Kellerman muttered. "Foss, tell whoever that is to keep moving." Nobody had to tell the driver anything. The door swung open, and a boot hit the pavement, then another. The man who stepped down was built like something out of a recruitment poster. 6'4", shoulders straining a fitted olive tee, forearms like cordwood, head shaved close, aviators on. He didn't run, he didn't shout. He walked toward them with the unhurried, terrible calm of a man who had already decided exactly how this was going to end. "Hey," Foss stepped out, hand on his holster. "Sir, get back in your vehicle. This is an active." The man didn't so much as glance at him. His eyes were locked on his cuffed father. "Stop right there," Kellerman ordered, hand dropping to his own holster. "Or you'll be joining." The man stopped 5 feet away and took off the sunglasses, slow, deliberate. His eyes were flat and cold and entirely without fear. "Officer," he said, voice low and level, "take those cuffs off my father. Right now." Kellerman blinked, caught off guard by the sheer command in it, then recovered his sneer. "Who exactly do you think you are?" The man reached into his back pocket. Foss screamed, "Gun!" and drew, but the object that came out was a black leather wallet, flipped open to reveal a photo ID and a military badge. "Captain Julian Dan Laddie," he said. "Canadian Armed Forces, 2nd Battalion, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. That vehicle you've got your hand on, I paid for it. He stepped closer, close enough that Kellerman had to tilt his chin up. Now unlock him, before I have to explain to your watch commander why you arrested a deacon on his way to his own son's homecoming. Kellerman looked at the ID, looked at the truck, looked at Emmanuel, still bent over the hood. The silence on the shoulder of Highway 2 stretched thin enough to hear the wind. Anyone can print a card at a Staples. Kellerman finally spat, tossing it into the gravel. Proves nothing. Julian didn't even glance down at it. Pick it up. Excuse me, that's government property. Belongs to active duty officer. You threw it in the dirt. Pick it up. Foss looked between the two men, sweating now. Trav, maybe just run the name if he's actually a shut up Foss. Kellerman's ears had gone red. He's obstructing. Aggressive posture, threatening a peace officer. I feel threatened. You feel threatened? Foss hesitated a beat too long. He's just threatened, Kellerman said, unholstering his taser and leveling it at Julian's chest. On the ground. Julian, please, Beatrice sobbed from beside the Lexus. Just do what he says, baby. Don't let him. Something moved behind Julian's eyes, a muscle jumping once in his jaw, and then it was gone, folded back down under something far more disciplined. He raised his hands, slowly, palms open, unarmed, but he did not kneel. I'm checking on my father, he said, calm as still water. He's 71, 2 knee replacements. If you keep him bent over that hood, his legs will give out. If he falls and is injured, I promise you, personally, you will never wear that badge again. That's a threat. That's a fact. He turned his back on the taser, an act of such total contempt that even Foss flinched and crouched by his father. Dad, look at me. Emmanuel turned his head, sweat running into his eyes. Julian, I told them. I told them whose car it was. I know, Dad. Julian's gaze dropped to the cuffs, ratcheted too tight, the skin already swelling. Something hot and dangerous climbed his throat. He swallowed it whole. Assess. Adapt. Overcome. Constable, he said, without turning around, reading the name badge. Foss. You're the secondary on this stop. You have a duty to intervene when your partner's using excessive force on a compliant elderly subject. Uncuff him. Foss looked at Kellerman. Kellerman's face had gone the color of a stop sign. Don't you dare touch those cuffs. He grabbed his radio. Dispatch. 4 Charlie 2, requesting backup, Highway 2 near the county line, multiple non-compliant subjects. 1 large male claiming military affiliation, situation escalating. Copy 4 Charlie 2, units en route. Julian turned back to Kellerman, voice dropping to something almost gentle, which made it worse. You ran a stop without checking the plate. You realized your mistake about 90 seconds in, and now you're doubling down because your ego can't survive admitting it. Kellerman drew his baton instead of holstering the taser. You're under arrest. Obstruction, interfering with a police matter. Interfering with what investigation? What crime? The car. Kellerman jabbed the baton toward the Lexus. I smell marijuana. The oldest lie in the book, a skeleton key for probable cause. You smell marijuana? Julian repeated flatly. In a car driven by a church deacon and a woman who thinks caffeine's a vice. Foss, you smell it too? Foss looked at the immaculate leather interior. Looked at Beatrice clutching her purse like a life raft. Aye, right? Kellerman's stare could have melted steel. Yeah, Foss whispered, eyes on his boots. I smell it. There we go, Kellerman said, triumphant. Probable cause. We searched the vehicle, and since you claimed ownership, Captain, you're part of this too. Turn around. Julian didn't move. He tapped the face of his tactical watch. You should know, Constable, that since I parked, this watch has been recording and syncing to a cloud server. My mother's phone is also open to 911 right now, live, recording everything said on this shoulder, and that Lexus has a 360 camera package that activates automatically when law enforcement initiates a stop, a feature I insisted on. Kellerman's eyes flicked to the Lexus, to the discreet lenses tucked into the grille and mirrors. You're bluffing. Try me. Julian took a step forward. Arrest me. Arrest my father. Tear apart a $100,000 vehicle, looking for drugs that don't exist. But understand, the second those cuffs go on me, this stops being a traffic complaint and becomes a chain of command inquiry that goes straight past your sergeant. Kellerman hesitated, but he was a gambler, and gamblers who've bluffed their way through a career don't fold on principle. Cuff him, Foss. 2 more cruisers arrived in a chorus of sirens, forming a chaotic blockade along the shoulder. Julian let them cuff him without resistance. His war had shifted from physical to legal, and he knew it. As the metal closed on his wrists, he stared directly into his own truck's dashcam lens, making sure his face and this injustice would be unmistakably documented. "Too tight?" Foss asked, almost apologetically as he clicked the ratchet. "It's fine," Julian said, and let the silence after do the rest of the talking. From the newest cruiser stepped Staff Sergeant Duncan Reeve, a heavy-set man with 30 years on the job and a mustache that had gone grey sometime during the Harper administration. He wasn't cruel like Kellerman. He was worse in a quieter way, the kind of man who protected his own out of habit rather than conviction. "What in God's name is this circus, Kellerman? Half the shift's out here." Kellerman hustled over, dropping his voice. "Sarge, matching description on a stolen luxury vehicle out of Calgary. Driver got hostile. Then this guy comes flying up in a monster truck. Badge or no badge, I think we're looking at trafficking, and I can smell weed in the cabin." Reeve looked at Emmanuel bent over the hood, at Beatrice weeping by the guardrail, at Julian standing cuffed and utterly composed. He didn't like what he was seeing, mostly because he could already smell the lawsuit. "Get the old man off the hood. Stand him up. But Sarge, he was. Stand him up." Kellerman yanked Emmanuel upright none too gently. His back cracked audibly. "Thank you," Emmanuel gasped, sweat stinging his eyes. Reeve turned to Julian. "You the son?" "Captain Julian Danladi, Canadian Armed Forces. I'm being detained unlawfully, and my father has been assaulted. He has medical conditions. I'd like him allowed to sit. We appreciate your service, Captain, but you can't just storm a traffic stop. This isn't a traffic stop. It's racial profiling with a manufactured smell of marijuana attached to it. There's no theft report on this vehicle. There never was." Reeve's eyes narrowed. He didn't love being lectured any more than the next man with a pension riding on his silence. "Kellerman says he smells weed. That's grounds to search. Car's clean. You walk." "It's clean," Julian said. "But he's going to plant something." I watched him reach toward his ankle before he leaned into the trunk. "That's a serious accusation against a sworn officer. It's an observation. Search the vehicle, Sergeant, and we'll see whose word holds up." Reeve nodded to Kellerman, who pulled on a pair of gloves with theatrical relish and tore into the Lexus, ripping open the glove box, dumping Beatrice's church bulletins onto the floor mat, hurling her Bible onto the seat. Julian watched, jaw tight, counting seconds. He knew exactly how this script ended. It took Kellerman 4 minutes to find a small rust-pitted revolver wedged, he claimed, beneath the spare tire, well in the trunk. "Bingo," he announced, holding it aloft by the trigger guard. Seals, filed off, unregistered firearm. Trafficking, adjacent vehicle. "We're taking everyone in." "That is not ours," Beatrice screamed. "We have never owned a gun in our lives." Reeve walked over, frowning at the gun's rust against the trunk's showroom clean carpet. "Under the spare, you're saying? Wrapped in a rag, deep in the well." Julian closed his eyes for one long breath. This was it. "Constable Kellerman," he said, "you've made a mistake. The only mistake was you coming back to town. The mistake," Julian continued, opening his eyes, "is that you didn't check the truck specs on a 2024 LX 600. This generation doesn't carry a spare tire. It's a flat floor over the hybrid battery pack and a run-flat inflation kit. There is no well. There is no space to hide anything under a spare tire, because there is no spare tire." Dead silence. Reeve strode to the trunk himself, lifted the panel, found exactly what Julian described. A sealed foam block over, electronics, dust-free, undisturbed. No room for a rusted revolver unless it had been sitting in plain view, which it plainly had not been, because Kellerman had claimed to dig for it. "Kellerman," Reeve said, voice gone very quiet. "Where, precisely, was this weapon?" It was wedged in the kit, the compressor kit." "You said under the spare." "I meant the kit." "Stop listening to him, he's a suspect." "Sarge," Foss said suddenly, voice shaking. I saw him pull a rag out of his own vest pocket before he leaned into the trunk." Kellerman rounded on him. "You lying little." "Enough," Reeve barked, stepping between them, hand drifting to his own sidearm without quite deciding to draw it. "He's a dirty cop trying to frame a soldier's family," Julian said, voice finally rising to full command volume. "And you have about 30 seconds to decide whether you're a witness or an accomplice, Sergeant." Sirens again, but a different pitch this time, and headlights that weren't municipal. A dark RCMP SUV eased up behind the blockade, and a woman in Canadian Armed Forces service dress stepped out alongside 2 plainclothes officers. Julian's shoulders dropped half an inch, the first crack in his composure all morning. "About time." The woman approached, gold crown on her shoulder boards. Sergeant, I'm of the Judge Advocate General. I was on an open line with Captain Danlardi's earpiece for the last 18 minutes. I heard the profiling comment. I heard the manufactured probable cause. I heard the discovery of that firearm. And I heard your constable describe where he claims to have found it. Twice, inconsistently. She turned to Kellerman, who had gone the color of old paper. I'd suggest you place this officer under arrest before the RCMP's Professional Standards Unit arrives, which will be in about 6 minutes. Sergeant Reeve looked at the gun, looked at Kellerman's shaking hands, looked, finally, at Emmanuel, free of the cuffs now, sitting on a folding chair Foss had scrambled to produce, his wrists ringed with angry red welts. Travis, Reeve said, correcting himself, voice flat with the particular exhaustion of a man watching 30 years of looking the other way collapse in real time. Drop the weapon. Hands on your head. Don't make this versatility. Kellerman's fingers went slack. The revolver clattered onto the asphalt. Reeve cuffed him with Kellerman's own restraints, the same ones that had bitten into Emmanuel's wrists 20 minutes earlier, and read him his rights in a monotone that sounded like a man reciting a eulogy he didn't believe in. By Monday, the Larkspur Hollow detachment was under a kind of siege it had never experienced. The dashcam and phone footage, quietly forwarded through JAG channels, had leaked to social media within hours. 4 million views by Sunday night. The hashtag #CapLatinDanLadi trending across the country. RCMP's Professional Data Unit had seized the server room, and Constable Aidan Foss, 24 years old and terrified, was sitting across from a professional standards investigator, telling them everything. He was my training officer, Foss said, hands wrapped around a paper cup of Tim Horton's coffee he hadn't touched. He said if you can't find a crime, you make one, because the department needs the seizure revenue. He kept a leaderboard, points for arrests, more points for luxury vehicles. He called it the game. And the vehicles? The investigator asked. They don't go to city auction. There's a scrapyard outside Okotoks, his brother-in-law's. They strip them or ship them south with washed titles. His sergeant got a cut. There's a judge who got a cut too. By the time the file landed on the desk of Crown Attorney Fiona Brasseur, it wasn't a bad cop story anymore. It was a racketeering case, a small-town seizure racket that had been quietly bleeding the vulnerable for the better part of a decade, and Emmanuel and Beatrice Danladi had simply been the first family unlucky enough to have a Marine, a captain for a son. Kellerman's holding cell phone call went to Judge Roland Ashby, the man who'd signed most of his warrants and taken his own quiet percentage for years. Judge, it's Travis. You gotta help me. Set bail. I'll disappear. Who is this? The voice on the other end said ice cold. I don't know a Travis. Call this number again and I'll have you charged with harassment. The line went dead. Kellerman stared at the receiver like it had betrayed him personally, which in its way it had. He was, for the first time in 10 years, entirely alone. The trial of His Majesty the King v. Travis Kellerman opened that October at the Calgary Courts Centre, and by the second week, it had become something close to a national spectacle. Emmanuel sat in the front row in a wheelchair. The torn meniscus from that day on the highway had needed surgery, with Beatrice beside him, spine straight as a flagpole, and Captain Julian Danlardi in dress uniform on the other side, a silent reminder of exactly whose family had been wronged. Kellerman had lost nearly 10 kilograms since July. The swagger was gone, replaced with a gaunt, hollowed look that made his uniform photo on the courtroom screen look like a stranger. Crown Attorney Fiona Brasseur didn't ask for a plea deal. The defense will argue this was a hunch that went wrong, she told the jury. We will prove it was calculated, systemic, and profitable. The star witness wasn't Julian. It was Aidan Foss, who took the stand and, brick by brick, dismantled whatever remained of the blue wall. There was a leaderboard in his locker, Foss testified, voice unsteady. A luxury vehicle was worth 50 points. A conviction was 10. He called it the game. Defense counsel objected. Hearsay, no physical evidence. Brasseur smiled and asked the bailiff to bring up the courtroom screens. RCMP forensics had recovered deleted photos from Kellerman's personal phone, despite an attempted remote wipe. There it was, a whiteboard, names, dollar figures, and at the top in red marker, top earner, the Reaper. Beside the name Danlardi, scrawled the morning of the stop, jackpot or bust. Then came the audio, record inside Kellerman's own cruiser minutes before the stop, recovered from the onboard system, admitted over defense objection. Look at them, Aidan. Probably don't even know how to work the AC. We take the car, sit them in holding for 48 hours. By the time they get a legal aid lawyer, the Lexus is already in pieces down south. Who's going to believe two nobodies over a decorated officer? Emmanuel closed his eyes. A single tear tracked down through the lines of his face. Not grief. Vindication. The jury deliberated less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Extortion, fabricating evidence, deprivation of rights, assault, perjury. The judge, a different judge, a federal one with no ties to Larkspur Hollow, looked down at Kellerman over his glasses. You took an oath to protect the vulnerable. Instead, you hunted them. You wore that badge like a license, Mr. Kellerman, and you are going to spend a very long time learning what it costs to have it revoked. 18 years, no parole eligibility before 12, and full restitution to every victim your leaderboard ever produced. The gavel came down like a door closing on a life. Kellerman looked for his wife in the gallery. She wasn't there. He looked for the men he used to call his brothers on the force. None of them had come either. The only people in that room looking back at him were the ones he'd tried to break, and every single one of them was still standing. 6 months later, spring came to the foothills the way it always does, reluctantly, and then all at once. The Larkspur Hollow detachment had been gutted and rebuilt from the ground up, body cameras mandatory now, a civilian oversight board with actual teeth. Sergeant Reeve had quietly retired. Judge Ashby had been disbarred and was facing his own charges. But the real story that spring was on the Danlardi's front lawn, where a barbecue was going strong enough that the whole street could smell the jerk chicken and Beatrice's butter tarts 3 houses down. Emmanuel sat on the porch with his cane leaning against the rail. He didn't need the wheelchair anymore. Watching neighborhood kids chase each other across the grass. A new Lexus silver this time, an apology gift from the dealership along with a donation to the Veterans Fund of Julian's choosing, sat in the driveway. Julian came up the porch steps in jeans and a t-shirt that read 2nd Battalion PPCLI and handed his father a cold ginger ale. Good turnout, Pop. Even a couple of the new constables stopped by, Emmanuel said, paid their respects. They know better than not to, Julian said, half a smile. Beatrice came out drying her hands on her apron, looking a decade younger than she had that July. That reporter from the Herald called again. Wants to know if you're running for city council. Julian laughed and shook his head. No, Mama, I've got another posting coming up. But I did decide what to do with the settlement money. The civil suit against the city had closed at $6.2 million. Emmanuel had grumbled that they didn't need it. He had his pension, his house, his health slowly coming back. Julian had simply pointed across the street to an empty lot that had sat derelict for 20 years. I bought that this morning, he said, unrolling a set of blueprints on the porch table. The Emmanuel and Beatrice Danlardi Community Legal Clinic. Free representation for anyone who can't afford it. Staffed by military legal officers and civil rights lawyers. A scholarship fund attached for kids the old racket had quietly ruined along the way. Beatrice pressed a hand to her mouth. With our name on it. With your name on it, Julian said. So what happened to you never happens to anyone else in this town again. A patrol car rolled slowly down the street. The young constable behind the wheel didn't slow to stare, didn't glance twice at the family on the porch. He simply raised a hand in a small, respectful wave and kept driving. Emmanuel lifted his ginger ale in return. We won, son, he said quietly. No, Dad, Julian said, looking out at the crowd. The new car, the blueprints catching the last of the evening light. We didn't just win. We changed what this town has to answer to. What happened on that highway outside Larkspur Hollow was never really about one bad constable with a leaderboard in his locker. It was about how easily a badge can be mistaken for permission, and how quickly that permission runs out the moment someone with power and love in equal measure decides enough is enough. Emmanuel and Beatrice didn't just get their names cleared. They built something that will outlast every person who wronged them. What would you have done in Julian's place? Badge or no badge? Tell us below, and if this one hit you the way it hit us, hit that like button and stick around for the next one.